Supply chains are being disrupted like they never have been before, with tariffs and trade wars and the after effect of COVID and just shifting customer demand, geopolitics. There's a lot of things that are disrupting supply chains right now. So what is it we can do to make our supply chain more flexible and resilient? In order to answer that question, I recently gave a keynote presentation at an industry conference talking about this topic, and I want to share that with you here today. Supply chain stability and how to get supply chain stability and resiliency as part of your usage of Epicor and any other technology you might be using. So this is really a tech agnostic view of how to improve your supply chain, and hopefully get some good nuggets and take on how to be more resilient and flexible and agile in your supply chain efforts. Just to get started, how many of you are having supply chain disruptions right now with tariffs, or tariffs affecting any of you right now? Okay, most of you. Are any of you still dealing with the ripple effect or the after effect of COVID supply chain disruptions? Okay, so a fair amount of you. So as if our jobs weren't hard enough, being supply chain managers, we have these external things that we can't always control. And I'd love to say my presentation is going to solve all those problems, but it's not. It's really meant to provide a framework for how to adapt to things that you can't predict and how to improve your ability to adapt your supply chains. Just to get a feel for who's in the room and where you are in your journeys, how many of you are in the middle of implementing Epicor right now, or an Epicor product? Okay. How many of you are using an Epicor product? Okay. How many of you are on the most recent version, would you consider, of the product? Okay. So a lot of you are already in a post-production, post-ERP implementation environment. And so it's perfect for this presentation because a lot of what I'll talk about is how do you get more value out of the technology you have. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that gets overlooked in digital transformations and ERP projects in general, is companies invest all this time and money in great technology, but they rarely get the full value of what they could be getting out of it. And so hopefully today this gives you some nuggets you can take away to transform your supply chain, improve your supply chain using the technology that you've all already invested in. So today what we'll talk about, I'll do a quick introduction to myself and my background, and then I want to dive into supply chain volatility and how that compares to stability and what we typically would want to see in a stable supply chain. We'll talk about how to build resiliency, and then I'll go through a couple case studies and best practices that we've seen work for some of our client base. And then any questions you have along the way, feel free to stop me, and I'll leave a few minutes at the end as well if you want to, if you think of something toward the end. So just a real quick background, my name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of a company called Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting company that helps clients with their ERP selection, their ERP implementation planning, as well as implementation support and post-implementation support. And a lot of the work we do is post-implementation. So companies that have already implemented something and they're trying to figure out how to either fix problems with the implementation that post-go live, and or they're trying to stabilize and get more value out of the technology through process improvements and organization and that sort of thing. So we're completely independent, tech agnostic. We're not affiliated with Epicor or any other software vendor. And our job is really just to help clients meet their business objectives with whatever technology is going to work best for them or whatever technology they might already have. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I started my career in the late 90s at one of the big four consulting firms doing SAP projects. So I did a lot of big Fortune 500 SAP implementations early in my career. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I became a bit jaded in those early years of my career, seeing how massively complex and messy those projects get and how much bias was undermining client success. And when I mean bias, I mean vendor bias, blind spots, myopic focus on technology, pushing an agenda to sell more technology. That oftentimes leads to unintentional consequences that are negative for customers. And so all through my career, even after I left the Big Four and went to other consulting firms, I just realized that's just how the industry is built. It was built around selling software. It wasn't necessarily built around getting real business outcomes for customers of the software. So that's why I started Third Stage Consulting, was to create a more independent, tech agnostic view of the world and to provide guidance to companies that wasn't focused on selling any sort of technology. So we only make money from our clients. We're not getting money from vendors, or we're not incentivized to recommend certain products or implement certain products. although we do have experience implementing many different ERP systems to clients, and we have several that are using Epicor right now or in the middle of implementing Epicor right now. But we also have clients that are implementing NetSuite and SAP, Oracle, Microsoft Dynamics, and other leading technologies in the marketplace. A big part of what I do too is I also am an expert witness, so I'll testify in court when there are challenges with an implementation. We'll go in and analyze what went wrong and provide testimony on why the project failed. And I bring that up because that experience base and that front row seat to big, massive failures and train wrecks teaches us a lot about how we can improve. What can we do better to help our clients avoid that sort of problem? And it sounds like most of you are through the journey for the most part, but I always view these digital transformations and ERP projects as an ongoing journey, something that isn't just one and done. You don't just hit the go live, flip the switch, and you're done. There's a lot of optimization and business value creation that you want to get out of the investments that you've made. And if anyone here is a classic rock fan, I named the company Third Stage after the band Boston. Their third album is called Third Stage, if you like late 70s classic rock. And the reason I chose that name is because really our job is to help clients reach the third stage of digital transformation. And there's a rocket launch analogy or metaphor that goes with that album, where a rocket launches, you get two stages, it gets it up into space, the boosters get it up into space, and it's the third stage launch that gets the rocket into orbit. And so I like that analogy because a lot of clients will get through a transformation, they get to that second stage, but they can't quite get to that ultimate future state that they're trying to get to. And so that's a big part of our philosophy is we help clients get more out of their systems and their technology, whether it's new technology or even in some cases we will work with clients who have legacy systems that aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And so we'll work with them to figure out how to incrementally improve that and get more business value. And then of course we have clients who go the other extreme, which is to completely rip out their technology stack and replace it with new technologies. So what I hope you'll gain today is just to understand some of the supply chain challenges today, although I think you all probably understand it better than anyone, but I do want to talk about and have a discussion around what some of the challenges are that you're facing, and then also talk about some of the digital strategies and examples for how you can build supply chain stability and resilience as well. So to start, we talked a little bit about tariffs earlier today and how that might be affecting your businesses. Just to build on that a little bit, how many of you that raised your hand that said you're having disruptions with tariffs right now? How many of you are being forced to kind of move where you're procuring raw materials or products from, or you're manufacturing? Are you having to switch to different countries or find all new suppliers as a result? Okay, so a few of you. And how is it, if you don't mind me asking one of you guys, how is it? I mean, is it stressful? Do you have a plan for it? Are you still trying to work your way through it?
Yeah, a lot of it is just weighing the cost of paying the tariff versus the higher manufacturing cost. And it would be a very simple decision if we knew the tariff rate wasn't going to change or increase or disappear tomorrow. So
Yeah.
kind of like, well, we don't want to say go ahead and ship it. If then a week later tariffs go away, it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But at least in the beginning, it almost sounded like it was going to be worked out with China. Now it doesn't appear that anytime soon.
Yeah. And then just this morning, there was a thing about the UK changing the tariff for the UK, reducing it. And I can imagine, we're always on the outside looking in, helping supply chain managers and companies with their supply chain. So we're not in the trenches with you guys in that same way you are. But it seems like that would just be a very stressful point to be in right now, with trying to just figure out how are we going to navigate this when we don't really know how the landscape's going to change. I mean, it could change tomorrow. It could not change for 6 months. It's probably going to change, but we just don't know how. How many of you that are working in supply chains now are experiencing stockouts or shortages right now, or just challenges getting raw materials or components for your supply chain? Are any of you struggling with that right now? Okay. And is that amplified with the stuff going on in the world right now, or is it just sort of an ongoing challenge in the same way you've always had? There are a lot of challenges that supply chains face today. I mean, you've always had the shifting consumer demand and the unpredictability and volatility of ebbing and flowing consumer demand. That alone, even in normal, stable times, if there is such a thing, that alone is difficult. And supply chains and technologies and processes behind the supply chain struggle enough as it is, just trying to get the right information and the right predictability around what the forecast is going to look like for demand, which obviously feeds the entire supply chain. So if you can't get that piece right, it's really hard to have an effective supply chain when your core input into understanding demand is so hard to predict. And so what we want to do is talk about, well, how can we do better with that? What are some ways that we can improve our planning and forecasting of what demand might look like? We talked about tariff regulations, geopolitical tensions, war. I mean, we've had clients for example, in Africa that completely stopped their project and stopped their implementations because they're in an area affected by war. And obviously there's a Russia-Ukraine war, which can affect some supply chains as well. And then other just general geopolitical tensions right now, and trade wars and things of that nature are all things that are shifting what I would consider a fairly stable global supply chain up until COVID. We had about a pretty solid 30-year run there where the supply chains were pretty efficient. I mean, they hummed along and we didn't have any major issues until COVID hit. And you always had the issues like the recession in 2008 kind of affected things in a different way, but overall, generally speaking, things were pretty stable until we got to 2020. And now in 2025, it's even more true in that the way the global supply chain was built back in the 80s, that really came to be into fruition in the 90s, they worked really well for a time, but now it's proving to have deficiencies and weaknesses in the way these supply chains have been built over the last few decades. And that's leading to raw material shortages. Many of you have mentioned, are any of you experiencing higher procurement prices right now? Okay. And you may or may not be able to pass that on to your customers, I suspect. I mean, I imagine that's a tricky balancing act, trying to figure out, do we pass that on or do we eat the cost in our margins? Labor shortages and transportation constraints are impacting multiple industries. That's another interesting phenomena that I don't fully understand since COVID, is that there seem to be a lot more labor shortages and it seems to not have gotten back to what it was. And so you hear on one hand that unemployment is at a certain level in the United States, but on the other hand you hear that people can't fill jobs and they're struggling to do it. And I'm sure it's just, I know it's not just a net raw number issue, it's more having the right skills in the right places when employers need them. But still, there's labor shortages that seem to be a bit more unique in the 2020s than what we've seen in the past. The supply chain ecosystem and understanding what supply chain stability means. When we think about stability, we don't mean it's just static and everything's going to be fine and it's going to be back like it was 2001 all over again and everything's super predictable in our supply chain. But we are talking about how can we be more agile and flexible? How can we adjust? How can we plan a supply chain around the fact that we can't predict what's going to happen in the future, and how to plan for the fact that there's other things that will probably happen in the world that we have no control over? How can we respond to that and be more flexible and more responsive and faster in our supply chain efforts? So one of the keys to do that is to have that end-to-end visibility for faster and smarter decisions. So knowing everything from what your customer demand is to what raw materials you need to procure when, and how to get it to your manufacturing shop floor by what time, how to get to the warehouse and ultimately to your customer in time. And that whole process obviously has a lot of information and visibility and inputs and variables that affect your ability to do that. And so that's where technology like ERP systems, like what Epicor and others provide, that's where these ERP systems can help provide that visibility to ensure that you are able to not only see what's happening within your immediate supply chain, but also try and go further up and downstream to get more visibility into your suppliers, as far as raw materials and status of what their inventory situation looks like or what their capacity looks like. And so being able to extend technology through the supply chain and expand the footprint of that supply chain technology is super important and helpful in that case. And then there's also scenario planning and proactive risk management. It's interesting because 20 years ago, I don't feel like when we did supply chain transformations 10 or 20 years ago, it didn't feel like you really had to think a lot about what if this happens or what if that happens. I mean, there was occasional, obviously, things that would pop up with a supplier goes out of business or they raise their prices and they're no longer viable for whatever reason. That stuff just happens. But as far as the general predictability of the supply chain, it's just a different time now. And so being able to look at your supply chain and really stress test it and poke holes in it and figure out where are the vulnerabilities. And just as an example, if we knew COVID was coming in 2020, which we didn't obviously, but if we did, we probably could have looked at our supply chains and analyzed it, and assuming we had the right information at the right time, we could have looked at what would a pandemic do to us, and what would the risk of concentrating all of our production or procurement in certain parts of the world, how could that affect our supply chain, and what would we need to do as a plan B, either in the event of a major disruptive event or as a way to just hedge and diversify our supply chain so we're not so dependent on one supplier or on one region or country in the world. And so it's really a way to rethink your supply chains and think about how can we use the technology and data we have to get better data-driven decision making for predictive and real-time action. And then also looking at technology as a way to provide modular, more scalable processes and systems. One of the advantages of working with a product like an Epicor, when you compare it to like an SAP S/4HANA or an Oracle Fusion or even Microsoft D365, the advantage of working with a kind of a mid-tier provider like Epicor is that there's not as much likelihood of breaking something. If you adjust your supply chain processes and technologies, you're less likely to break something that requires you to rethink the entire way you've implemented software. So a lot of times these bigger systems are so complex, and so there's so many different variables that go into them that it can be very difficult to make modular changes. And so you have an advantage here over some other ERP customers in the world in that you do have a bit more flexibility and modularity with the products you have now compared to some of the others that are out there. So some strategies to build resilience. In other words, what do we do about it? We know what the problem is. We're all feeling it right now. You've shared some of your stories and battle wounds behind that. But what can we do about it? How can we fix the process, and how can we put some strategies and tactics in place that's going to help us improve? Well, some of the ways that we can do it is certainly modern ERP and supply chain systems can help provide our ability to execute. Cloud platforms enable real-time collaboration and system integration. So the beauty of those of you that are in the cloud, which by the way, how many of you are on a cloud version of ERP right now? Okay, about half of you. So the beauty of being in the cloud is that it does enable more of these AI types of features, and it certainly supports better integration to other systems, or even if you want to get better information or integration with your suppliers, for example. Being in the cloud enables that in a way that you couldn't do with on-prem, or you can't do nearly as effectively. So having AI, having integration up and downstream in your supply chain, having better data is really a powerful thing with these cloud solutions. And so we can start thinking about ways that we can use the fact that we're in the cloud. What can we do differently as it relates to our supply chain? Because I imagine there's some of you in the room that have implemented a cloud solution, but you might be trying to do things the way you've always done them within that cloud environment. So it's an opportunity to really rethink. Let's look at what we're not doing well, or where the blind spots are in our supply chain, and how can we use the technology we have to potentially address those. And also, by the way, what are some of the features that we have in our current new technologies? How can those features potentially help inform or give us some ideas on how we improve our processes? I know I gave the same presentation yesterday, and there was someone in the room that talked about the SMART technology from Epicor and its ability to kind of improve supply chain forecasting. They just implemented it. I think she had just said within the last few weeks, like within the last month, they had just gone live with this new technology from Epicor. And it was too early to tell, what kind of immediate impact it was going to have on their business, but it's just an example of a small piece of technology that can have a big impact potentially on what you've already invested in and what you've already got. So really looking at ways, especially with the way technology is changing today, it's constantly evolving. It's changing so fast that it's hard even for people like us to keep up with. So there's always new features, new capabilities you could be leveraging and taking advantage of, and that's the beauty, and that's the beauty of being in the cloud, and that's also what you're paying for. The whole model behind cloud subscription services is that you are constantly getting new innovation, new updates and enhancement to the software. In fact, so much so that most organizations can't keep up. Epicor and other ERP vendors are always going to move faster than the ability of most organizations to keep up. So it's a matter of really being deliberate about where you can leverage technology better to improve your processes. Also looking at composable architecture, that's a big thing we're seeing with a lot of our clients, is not looking at it as just one big massive ERP rollout and implementation and system, but also looking at how we break it down into pieces and how can we optimize at a more micro level within different parts of our business, including supply chain management. For example, if procurement is one of your biggest challenges right now and supplier management, then you can go in and look at those processes and look at optimizing what you're using and doing there without necessarily having to break everything or redo what you've done in finance and other parts of your business as well, CRM, other pieces as well. And I think where AI is going to have a huge impact, I know there's been a lot of talk about AI in this conference. It's hard to sit through any session without hearing AI at least 5 to 50 times in a 50-minute session. But AI, I think, for supply chain management is going to be huge. And I think in my opinion, AI is going to improve and help change supply chain management more than any other part of any business. Yes, it'll help finance. Yes, it'll help CRM. Yes, there's benefits all around the board. But I think in supply chain management, it really does lend itself well to AI because of all the complexity of the various data points that organizations are trying to make sense of, and how much variability there is in the data and how hard it is for humans to make sense of all these different data points, track of what's going on in the supply chain. So that's where I think the beauty of being a supply chain, these AI tools are going to be pretty powerful in enabling some of these game-changing quantum leap sorts of improvements. And then, final strategy that I'll share with you here today is digital twins and simulation. So really looking at almost like almost kind of how you would do a test environment before the ERP implementation. Many of you, I imagine, had test environments. You went through user acceptance testing, you worked through the problems, you fixed them, and then you went live. It's a similar sort of thing with the digital twin concept in that you actually create a simulation of what if. What if, we can't procure from China anymore? What if the EU imposes tariffs on the US? What does that mean? Are we diversified enough in our supplier base? So it's really a way for us to create a parallel model that we can test and stress test and look at, and then potentially introduce improvements that we identify during that digital twin sort of stress test. So that's another way that we see clients trying to navigate and build a foundation to be able to adapt with the full understanding that they're not going to be able to predict everything that possibly could go wrong or change in the world of supply chain management. How many of you right now, are any of you using AI in any capacity within your supply chain efforts at the moment? Sort of. A lot of potential, and if most of you are not yet using AI, that means the good news is there's a lot of opportunity, within Epicor and other tools too that will allow you to potentially improve the supply chain in terms of the analytics behind it, but also just generative AI too. Figuring out ways that you can use generative AI to provide efficiency gains along the way too. So it's almost overwhelming when you think about all the possible use cases of AI, and so I think it's important to look at maybe micro cases, low-hanging fruit, and sort of a bottoms-up approach to innovation where you look at specific pain points or issues you're having in your supply chain and look at ways you might use AI to solve those problems, and then test it out and roll it out at scale. And so it's kind of an interesting time right now because it's again a good opportunity to have a continuous improvement mindset and a good opportunity to take advantage of what you're already paying for, especially for those of you in the cloud. You're paying for these great products that are being developed every day, so you might as well figure out ways to take better advantage of them. So just to share a couple of examples here and case studies of what we've seen in a couple of different situations. One is a manufacturing company that we worked with that was having global parts shortages. And so what they did is they did multi-tier supplier integration. So they started getting more data points from their suppliers further upstream rather than just waiting to see, what is the ATP that they give us to be able to promise, and are they going to deliver it on time or not. It's more looking further upstream to what their capacity is, what their availability is, what their inventory is, and just having that more collaborative partnership with your suppliers to share information and visibility so that you can then know, where your risks are and where the big challenges might be. And so by doing this, demand sensing to look at, getting different data points to pick up demand on the because they're a B2B manufacturer, so they were able to get information from the customers as well in predicting their demand better, and they were also able to get information from the multi-tier suppliers as well. So they covered both sides, the upstream and downstream aspects of their supply chain, and they integrated more data and more technology to get that information and that visibility. And so as a result of that, they're able to reduce the lead time pretty significantly. And this is a pretty complex manufacturer. So they manufacture end products that have hundreds of different raw materials. And all it would take is that, that one raw material that was critical to finishing it. You could have the other 99 already in stock or ready to go, but that one that you're missing can disrupt the entire supply chain. So you don't have to fix a lot. If you fix that 1 out of 100 that's causing a problem, that's a big impact. It can have a big savings as well. So that's what happened here with this client is that sort of lead time reduction. And then the second one is a distribution company. So I wanted to give kind of an example for manufacturing, distribution, and retail.
Did it require significant change in their headcount and resources, or were they able to use their internal team they already had to develop this?
Yeah, they used their internal team. I mean, we worked with them to help them through it, but they didn't have to go hire a new headcount permanently or anything. They did have to. It was much less of a technology initiative than it sounds. It was actually more of a change management, process improvement type of thing, because a lot of it involved external third parties, involved the suppliers and the customers, and getting their buy-in and getting their involvement. So that was the hard part. But the good news is they didn't have to buy a bunch of new technology, and they also didn't have to hire a bunch of headcount either. So yeah, it was interesting how small little things can have such a big impact. And it actually reminds me of remember a couple years ago, after we were 2 years into COVID or whatever it was, so maybe in 2022 or 23, a lot of the American car companies were saying that they had all these thousands of cars just sitting on their lots because they were manufactured, but they were missing that one chip from South Korea that they couldn't get, or that one component that they just couldn't sell these cars. So they were sitting all this inventory for forever. And it really, obviously that cost them a lot of money to have these cars that were almost done. You had all the money tied up in it, but you couldn't sell them yet because of the component or that one piece that was missing along the way. And in fact, I bought a car recently, like a year and a half ago, and they bought it to me as it is, but I'm going to be able to live without this, so don't feel bad for me. But the automatic parking thing that cars have, that you just hit the button and it parallel parks for you, it had that feature, but it was missing a chip that doesn't allow it to work. So they knocked a little bit off the price and said, we'll just sell it to you as it is. But it was just a reminder of how supply chain is still affecting us today. Like I said, I will survive not being able to parallel park with computers, but it's just a reminder that that's just one example of many that organizations are having right now. And so another was a distribution company, and we looked at manufacturing, want to look at distribution, we'll also look at retail as well, because we do work in all three industries. By the way, most of our clients are in manufacturing, distribution, or retail. I'd say 70 to 80% of our revenue is in that space, so we have a lot of case studies to draw from here. But this one was more recent too, in terms of the tariff disruptions and fluctuating demand. Their solution was a cloud-based inventory and logistics optimization. So here they did put more technology in place than the first case study. These guys needed technology. They didn't have a modern technology to help them through this process. So by putting in new technology and getting data up and down the supply chain, and that they're able to reduce their stockouts by 30%. So, and that's the key too, is that you want to reduce your stockouts, but you also don't want to necessarily have to stockpile tons of inventory. And that's, the $1 million question here is what's the right answer and what's the right balance? And part of that is a financial decision. So you're just making sure you're aligned with your finance team and your CFO on what's more important, what's going to give us the best return on our investment. Is it to have that excess inventory potentially, knowing that we're going to be able to service our customers? Or are we okay with a certain stockout rate, knowing that we're optimizing our inventory levels? And so obviously you want to find an ideal mix of both, and you can strive for that, but you're never going to be 100% in your accuracy or in your ability to do that. And then a retailer that we worked with was a heavy e-commerce provider, so a lot of their sales were online rather than bricks and mortar, and they used AI forecasting warehouse management system upgrade to improve their business. And so AI they used to better predict the e-commerce demand, because it was a new at one point was a new channel for them. They were bricks and mortar, and then they opened up the e-commerce side of things. And that e-commerce side, they just weren't as accurate as predicting demand. And so they used AI to better understand the patterns and the purchasing behavior of their customers. And so that's another example of where AI can help. And then, they again invested, like the second case study, they invested new technology on the warehouse management side. They were having trouble with the whole pick, pack, ship process was not effective. They also had warehouse design issues too that were unrelated to the software, so that was part of the improvement as well. And all of that led to 20% improvement in on time and in full delivery. So some of the best practices and lessons learned here I'll share, and then we'll open up to questions here too, is that starting with business process improvement first is a great way to learn how you can better use technology, especially if it's technology or need an incremental improvement or addition to your technology, by defining and understanding where your processes are working well and where they aren't working so well, or where there's opportunities to improve them. It really helps you focus and be more deliberate about how you could use technology improvements, as well as improvements to your people and your processes too. The training and the way processes are designed, all that good stuff can be improved without having to necessarily invest a ton of money in new technology. Ensuring you've got alignment between IT operations and supply chain, that's super important, and even finance. I just mentioned how finance is important too, because supply chain is where a lot of the money is sitting. And so making sure your finance is on board with the strategy as well, making sure you're all on the same page and have a clear understanding of what the objectives are and what the priorities are, because there are oftentimes competing priorities internally, which is another factor that needs to be considered in addition to all the external stuff that we've talked about so far. And then investing in training and change management to drive adoption. I can't tell you how many projects I've done where a client calls us and says, our ERP system, we just implemented, it sucks, it's not working, we need someone to come in and fix it. And so we'll go in and look at it and say, actually the technology's fine. There's other issues though, in the way you're using it and the way your processes are misaligned with the way the software works and vice versa. So let's figure out how to fine tune it. And a lot of times it just comes down to training. Like you've got this feature, this module over here that no one's ever been trained in, you didn't even turn it on, you own it but you never turned it on. A lot of times little things like that, there's a ton of them in most organizations we go to. So whenever a client says to us, our ERP system sucks, we're always very skeptical. Does it really suck, or is there something else going on with the way you're using it? And then of course, companies like Third Stage, being independent, vendor neutral, tech agnostic, we can help you figure out ways to use whatever tools you need to use, whether it's technology, people, process, strategy, alignment, whatever it is. We can help you through that process to help you get more value out of the systems. And I've been thinking lately about how it'd be fun to do a study. And when I say fun, I don't mean like you'd want to do it on a weekend, but it'd be kind of interesting. Maybe that'd be a better thing to say. But I thought it'd be kind of interesting to measure throughout the United States or even globally how much money is lost right now because organizations just aren't optimizing what they've got. How much of an ROI has been wasted on ERP implementations and technology in general. Not because the technology can't do what they say they can do, but because the organizations haven't figured out how to use it the way they should. And when we go into these assessments, there's always a big chunk of improvements that they could be making right now that have big immediate value. It may not solve the long-term problem of needing to stay up to date and current on new technologies and whatnot, but there is a big subset of stuff you could be doing right now without any sort of technology investment. And so that's a big part of what we look at too, is just objectively speaking, without having an agenda to try and sell more software, we always help our clients figure out how to get more out of the supply chain and overall business efforts too. And so some of the ways that we can help, and even if we don't help, some of the things you might do to go get started on your journey is to look at digital strategy and supply chain roadmap. So what is your digital strategy? What is that ongoing plan? Just out of curiosity, how many of you have an ongoing continuous improvement or evolution of your current ERP stack and environment? Are any of you still, even those of you that have implemented already, are any of you still making adjustments, enhancement as you go? Okay, most of you it looks like. Yeah, and I think just having a deliberate roadmap around that, and again, not just focus on technology, but also people process as well is critical. And then technology selection and implementation planning. If there is a technical need or a technology upgrade or replacement that you think needs to happen, that's we can help with as well, as far as objectively defining what tools are best going to help you. And then organizational change management, supply chain optimization too. That's another area we're good at. We work in a lot of supply chains. We do a lot of change management. We do a lot of process improvements, and we do a lot of ERP implementation. So putting all that together to look at the whole big picture of your supply chain is something that we're good at. And as I mentioned, we've got a lot of experience with manufacturing, distribution, and retail.